Okay, so we've worked through some example problems and talked a little bit about how we do that. I thought we'd do just a couple more to show you more like problems that might be on an exam and to ensure you that they're fairly simple. You just have to think carefully about how to break them down and work with them, okay? So let's look at a problem. Here's what you're faced with. You turn the page of the exam. Oh my goodness. I got to read all this stuff about aniridia, which I don't even know what that is, and migraines, and I'm asking questions about this and this and this. Well, obviously, first thought in your mind is I need somehow to diagram them. That's what I'm going to be doing, right? I've got to come along and I've got to say who's A, who's B, who's C, and maybe even C prime or whatever to get down one more level. But really, what can I do, right? So I'm sitting here, well, how would I deal with this problem? Well, I deal with this problem by saying, well, in this first paragraph up here, there's quite a bit of information right there. Let's just get rid of the rest of this, not worry about it. I mean, we're going to diagram it, right? That's what we're after. I know it's going to ask me about genotypes and phenotypes and ratios. That's what these problems ask you about. So what can I extract? Remember, we always want to take the given information, right? That's what we want to do. So what's given here? Well, there's quite a bit. It says that aniridia occurs in humans, and it's an allele A. They want you to force you to allele A, which is dominant, right? Okay, so we can write that down. Big A is dominant over little a, right? And big A is associated with this absence of an iris or malformed iris, which causes blindness, and it's aniridia, genetic problem. And then having normal vision is little a, it's recessive, okay? Now what else we got? Well, apparently migraines, big M is dominant over allele for the absence of that. So we've got another dominant recessive. In that case, migraines is a dominant over normal or non-migraines, okay? That whole first paragraph, that's what we can symbolize it as. That's what we need to know. Big A is dominant over little a, big M is dominant over little m. That might have been more complicated, as we'll see in other later problems, but it's there. Whatever's there, write it down, okay? And you've got this big old next paragraph here about who's got normal vision and not normal vision, and fathers have got aniridia, but others don't. Just start working through it. Remember, we're going to diagram, so we need some A and B. Who's A? Well, looks like this man right here is probably A, and this woman is probably B. So let's look and see what they have, right? We've got a male and we've got a female. That's what we need for reproduction in this case. The male has normal vision and without migraines, okay? How do you have normal vision? You got to be recessive, right? So little a, little a. He doesn't have migraines, so he must have little m, right? So for his normal vision, little a. Just write it down, right? We haven't done anything, haven't figured anything out, except that we can just simply write down that he doesn't have migraines, he must be recessive, okay? The female has normal vision, so she must have little a, but she does have migraines, okay? So that tells us we're going to have at least one dominant allele for her, okay? And we don't know right now what the other is. She could be big M, or she could be big M, little m, right? That's what we don't know. But we've got that much, and all we did was wrote this down, okay? So then we start dealing with some questions. First question is, was the man's father, so this guy's father, homozygous or heterozygous for aniridia? We say that he had it. We know he has a big M, right? So what was he? Well, he was heterozygous. How do we know that? Because this male got two little A's. He's got normal, right? Mom gave him one of these little A's. Where'd the other one come from? It's just a logic problem. It had to come from dad. So dad had to be heterozygous for that. Okay. All right. Then we have the woman. What did the woman's mother suffer from migraines? Okay. Well, it says her father never had any migraines, right? We know that she's this, so we're going to say, I think it's probably the answer is yes. Why? Well, because dad, the father, was recessive, so he must have given her little m's. That's all he could give. She got a big M. Where she got a big M from somebody, right? Because she has to be this genotype ultimately. Well, the mother had to be the one to give it to her. Now, we don't know whether the mother was homozygous or heterozygous, but she had at least one big M, one dominant, because she gave it to the daughter. Okay? Now, most human systems, genetic diseases and genetic issues are fairly rare. So in reality, she's probably a het, but we don't know that. Okay, but we certainly do know though that she had a homozygous, or excuse me, she had a dominant M to give. Right, that's where the daughter got it. So we now know the full genotypes. We know that this male is a complete dihybrid recessive. We know that she's recessive at the vision allele, but she is a heterozygote at the migraine headache allele. So that should help us answer the next set of questions, which is what kind of kids are they going to produce, right? So what you see is that we've got this mixed problem. We've got a problem where you were given some information about A and B there, and since A and B came from some parents, they're part C really in that case. So you were able to go back to their parents and figure out what they were. Now we've got A and B, and we're going to ask you, tell me what the kids are going to be. So we had a partial bottom up, and now we're going to ask you about some top down issues. Okay. In other words, what kind of kids can these guys produce? Well, it's a simple Mendelian problem, right? You're going to take the A allele, the vision alleles, multiply those out by Mendel's big six, right here. And you're going to take the migraine alleles, and you're going to multiply those out by Mendel's big six, right? So what's the probability of this couple producing a child normal for both traits? In other words, to be normal, you'd have to be a complete recessive at both loci. What's the probability of that? Well, if we make this cross right here, they're going to have normal vision. Every child's going to have normal vision, right? Unless there's a mutation, which we're not worried about. They're not going to pick up aniridia because neither parent has it, okay? Now, one parent has migraines, and she's being mated with this male who doesn't, so you get a 1-to-1 ratio right off of here, right? Okay, so if we figure out what's the probability, well, it's 1 times whatever this is, which is 1/2, right? So it's 1 times 1/2. So the overall probability of this by the product rule is 1/2. About half of their children, male or female, we're not worried about what their genders are, but half their children ought to be completely normal vision. Okay, if you prefer fractions, that's 1 times 1/2 is obviously 1/2, right? So you want to work in the fractional state, whichever way you want to work. Okay, and then maybe another question: what's the probability of having a child who's affected by both traits? In other words, what's the probability of getting some kid that's going to have this absence of an iris, dominant big A, dominant big M? Well, you can look up here and see that it's 0, right? Okay, why? Because you don't have the ability to pass on from either one of these parents a dominant allele. So that becomes 0. 0 times anything is 0. So the probability of this happening is 0. What's the probability that a child will have normal vision and migraines? Okay, normal vision and migraines. Again, well, all we're doing is looking at the segregation ratios. Everybody's going to get normal vision. That's 100%. Half of them are going to get migraines. So once again, we're at a half, right? So same probability of having a child with completely normal vision and completely normal or non-migraines as it is for having a child with completely normal vision but having migraines. About half their kids should have expected to have at least carry the dominant allele for this form of migraine headache. Okay? And we're going to talk later in the semester about some of the things that actually cause this, what the genetic basis is. Right? Now let's take a global problem. You're told about some dominant stuff. Tall is dominant over short, white is dominant over red, or you figure that out from the problem itself. And you're given a tall white plant. How would you determine its genotype? It's tall and white. Well, it's got a big T, it's got a big W, but I don't know if it's a homozygote or a heterozygote. I don't know what it could be, right? In fact, this tall white could be any one of these 4 genotypes. It could be homozygous dominant for both loci. It could be homozygous dominant for one, but not the other, or just the converse of that. Or it could be a dihybrid het, something like this. How would we do it? How would we fix it? Well, the answer is obviously you'd set up some kind of dihybrid test cross, right? And you would just try to see what the results are. You'd say, okay, if it's dominance here, I can pick a recessive, I can back cross it or find it, and I should look for different outcomes. If it's homozygous at both loci for the dominant allele, big T's and big W's, I expect to see nothing but this outcome, right? Everybody ought to be a heterozygote, and they ought to all be tall and white. If it happens to be that this tall white is heterozygous at the tall locus, but homozygous at the color locus, and you cross it, you're still just doing Mendel's big six, right? You're going to now get a 1-to-1 in this, much like we had before. So we ought to get about a 1-to-1 expected outcome for the progeny. Okay, and we get a couple of more as we take this one right here, this individual, and cross it. It's doing the same thing, except it's changing from the height allele, tall or short, to the color allele. And we're seeing that we should get some tall whites and some tall reds. We're changing this locus, right? And then finally, if it's a het times het, we're going to get something like this, a 1-to-1 for both of them from Mendel's Big Six. And we should end up with a 1-to-1 to 1-to-1 tall. Now, some students do this problem. They say, well, which one was it? There's no answer. I'm just saying this is all the possibilities. Why do we go through this? Because you'll find out that many of these problems, these dihybrid problems, really somewhere in there are a test cross. And it's one of these four genotypes that you have. If you know how to do them, you know what to expect, you can look quickly and say, oh yeah, okay, what I've got here is really some kind of either complete or partial dihybrid test cross. And I'm getting this answer here, so that means there must be something like this. Or I'm getting a 1-to-1 to 1-to-1, so it must be that the genotype was this. You understand the underneath side, then all those words that are thrown at you kind of go away, and you can see the vision of the basic cross that you're trying to diagram. Okay? All right, so we've now done the basic Mendelian. We have worked through some dihybrids, worked through problems. Now we'll take a little side trip on the next lecture set and pull us back and try to explain where did this Mendel stuff come from? Where do we get this meiosis and relationship to Mendel? You know, where do we get this segregation and assortment, and how do those two play a role for us in this?